He woke beneath rust-stained vaults, memories fractured, whispers clawing at his mind. Rebirth was supposed to be holy, until he saw what waited in the dark. The first thing he tasted was blood. Iron thick on his tongue, warm and wrong, clinging to the back of his throat like a secret that refused to die. Jerk gasped awake beneath rust-stained vaults, the air damp and reeking of mildew, his breath fogging in the chill. Shadows clung to the arched ceiling like cobwebs, and in those shadows something moved, or maybe it was only his fractured mind trying to fit sense to the impossible. His hands scrabbled against stone slick with moisture, nails catching on rough edges. Pain bloomed sharp and real. That at least told him he was alive, but alive where? And alive as what? He remembered dying. That much was clear. The memory came in flashes, the choke of smoke as the hab block burned, the roar of distant explosions, the sharp sting of lasfire as the arbitrators poured into the streets. He remembered falling, lungs screaming for air, the world tilting sideways, then blackness, and now this. A figure loomed over him. Not a medic, not an arbitrator, but a woman with pale scars tracing patterns down her shaved scalp, each line filled with ink that glimmered faintly in the low light. She wore tattered robes heavy with strange sigils, and in her hands she held a bowl carved from bone, filled with some dark fluid that steamed despite the cold. Her eyes locked onto his, and in them he saw something that made his stomach lurch. Reverence, yes, but also ownership. "Breathe slowly," she said, her voice low and deliberate as if coaxing a newborn. "The gift unsettles the flesh at first, but it will pass." Jerk pushed himself upright. His muscles screamed in protest and his vision blurred, edges doubling and swimming. "Where?" The word croaked out, raw and uncertain. "You are among the devoted now," the woman said. "Your old life burned with the city. You were chosen for rebirth." The word rebirth struck him like a physical blow. He looked down at his own body and froze. His skin was pale, far paler than it had ever been, and strange, spiraling marks had been inked into his flesh, running along his arms, curling around his chest, and disappearing beneath the tattered rags someone had dressed him in. His hands trembled as he traced one of the markings. They were warm to the touch, almost alive. He remembered his name, Jerk. He remembered his sister Mara, who'd been with him when the fire started. Her hand had slipped from his in the crush of the fleeing crowd. He remembered shouting her name until his voice broke. "Where's my sister?" he asked suddenly. The woman tilted her head slightly as if listening to some voice only she could hear. "Names mean little here. If she was worthy, she will be found. If not," her smile was thin and sharp as a knife, "the Dark Ones claim their due." Panic clawed at his chest. He lurched to his feet, swaying, but she was faster. A hand shot out, gripping his arm with inhuman strength. "Do not fight the gift," she hissed. "It is already inside you." He opened his mouth to protest, but then he heard it, the whisper. At first he thought it was just the damp air moving through cracks in the stone, but no. It was inside his skull, soft and insistent, speaking in a language he didn't know yet somehow understood. It spoke of belonging, of release, of tearing down everything he had ever believed. And buried in those whispers, faint but unmistakable, was his own name. Jerk stumbled back, his heartbeat thundering. The woman watched him with something like satisfaction, as if this reaction was expected. Around them, other figures emerged from the shadows, men and women with similar markings, their eyes shining with fanatic light. Some wore crude masks fashioned from animal skulls, others carried rusted blades or chains, but all looked at him as though he were both miracle and offering. A chant began, low and rhythmic, echoing through the chamber. He couldn't make out the words, but the cadence dug into his spine, setting his nerves alight. The woman raised the bone bowl high, and the chanting swelled. Someone lit a brazier, and greasy smoke coiled upward, stinging his eyes. The air grew warmer, heavier, thick with incense and sweat and something coppery that reminded him too much of the blood in his mouth. They surrounded him now, the devoted, their bodies swaying in time with the chant. He felt the weight of their expectation pressing in from all sides. The woman stepped forward, dipping her fingers into the bowl, then smeared the dark liquid across his forehead. It was warm, warmer than blood should be. "Welcome, Reborn," she intoned. He wanted to run, he wanted to scream, but the whispers grew louder, drowning out his thoughts. A sudden image slammed into his mind, a vast, writhing shape lurking beneath the fabric of reality, its gaze fixed on him with terrible intimacy. His knees buckled. The cultist surged forward, not to harm but to catch him, lift him, carry him toward a tunnel at the far end of the chamber. He struggled, but their grip was iron, their movements practiced. The tunnel sloped downward. The deeper they went, the hotter the air became until sweat ran freely down his spine. The walls pulsed faintly, like the inside of a living creature. He could hear distant chanting, many voices merging into one vast, throbbing sound that seemed to vibrate in his bones. The whispers in his head shifted from language to sensation, terror, exultation, hunger. They emerged into a cavernous hall lit by fire pits and lined with towering statues of figures he didn't recognize, some human, some monstrous hybrids. In the center stood a massive stone altar slick with dark stains, surrounded by robed figures. Atop the altar lay a figure strapped down with chains. Even from a distance, Jerk recognized the unmistakable slackness of the dead. The woman who had revived him led the group forward, her voice joining the chorus as they approached the altar. Jerk's pulse hammered in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to do something, but his legs refused to obey. The whispers had wrapped around his mind like vines, tugging him forward. As they neared the altar, the chanting stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so deep it made his skin crawl. All eyes turned toward a figure at the far end of the hall, a tall man clad in dark robes embroidered with sigils that seemed to shift when stared at too long. His face was hidden behind a smooth, featureless mask. He raised a hand, and the cultists dropped to their knees as one. Jerk remained standing for a heartbeat too long. The masked man tilted his head slightly, and in that tiny motion Jerk felt something immense brush against his thoughts, cold and alien. His knees buckled. "Another soul reclaimed," the masked man said, his voice amplified by some hidden mechanism echoing through the cavern. "The pattern unfolds." A wave of ecstasy rolled through the crowd. Jerk felt it too, unwilling, as if the emotion had been injected straight into his veins. His mind reeled. This wasn't just a cult, it was something far larger, older, and far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The masked man's gaze fixed on him, pinning him like an insect beneath glass. "Bring him forward," he commanded. And they did. Jerk's heart slammed against his ribs as the altar loomed closer. He caught sight of the corpse again, its eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a rictus grin, and understood with a clarity that hollowed him out that his rebirth was only the beginning. The masked man stepped down from his dais, robes whispering against the stone, and placed a hand against Jerk's chest. The whispers inside his head swelled into a roar, and for an instant he saw it again, that vast, writhing presence staring at him through the cracks of reality. His scream tore the silence apart as the cavern plunged into darkness. Darkness swallowed everything. It wasn't merely the absence of light. It was a living thing that pressed against his skin and slid down his throat like smoke. Jerk thrashed in blind panic, but rough hands gripped his arms and shoulders, holding him fast. The chanting had ceased, yet a dull vibration pulsed through the chamber as if some vast heart had begun to beat beneath the stone floor. The masked man's hand remained on his chest, and beneath that palm something writhed. Not inside his flesh but beneath it, as if his body had become a thin membrane stretched over something waking up. Then light returned, not gently, but in a violent burst as fire pits roared back to life. The sudden brightness stabbed at Jerk's eyes, and when he blinked through the glare, he saw that he was no longer at the edge of the chamber. He was lying flat on the altar, his wrists and ankles bound by chains etched with jagged runes that bit into his skin. Cultists knelt in a circle around him, their foreheads pressed to the floor, their voices rising in a low, feverish hum. The masked man stood at the head of the altar, arms spread wide, robes billowing like dark wings. "You return to the flesh as nothing," the masked figure intoned, his voice deep and resonant, vibrating in Jerk's skull. "But through the pattern you will be remade. Through the gift you will be unbound." Jerk tried to speak, to plead, to scream, but his throat refused him. His voice came out as a hoarse rasp, drowned out by the rising chant. The whispers inside his skull grew sharper, no longer soft coaxing but serrated commands. "Do not resist. Let go, become." The woman with the scarred scalp approached, carrying a narrow blade forged from some dull, dark metal. Its edge shimmered faintly, not with reflected light but with an inner glow that made Jerk's stomach twist. She moved with ritual precision, standing beside him at the altar, and dipped the blade into the bowl of steaming liquid she'd carried earlier. When she lifted it again, the dark fluid clung to the blade like oil. She leaned close to his ear. "It is better," she whispered, "if you stop fighting." Her breath smelled of incense and blood. Jerk strained against the chains, the iron digging into his wrists. He thought of Mara, her face streaked with ash as the city burned, her voice calling his name through the smoke. He'd promised her they'd survive together. He'd sworn it. And now here he was, helpless on some blasphemous altar beneath the hive, surrounded by strangers who called him Reborn. The blade touched his skin, and cold fire seared a line down his chest. He gasped. The cut wasn't deep, but something alien bloomed beneath the wound, a warmth that spread through his veins like spilled ink soaking into paper. The cultist's chant surged, and for a moment Jerk's vision fractured. He saw the vaulted chamber not as stone and shadow, but as a pulsating organic cathedral, walls flexing like muscle, statues shifting and breathing, the air thick with luminous spores that swirled around him in lazy spirals. Then the vision snapped back, leaving him gasping. The masked man stepped closer. "You hear it, don't you?" His voice was soft now, almost intimate. "The pattern calls to you. It called to all of us once. Some run from it, some deny it. But you were chosen." "I didn't choose this," Jerk managed to choke out, his voice cracking. A ripple went through the gathered cultists, amusement, pity, perhaps both. The masked man tilted his head. "No one ever does," he replied. The woman drew another line with the blade, this time along his forearm. The warmth flared again, stronger, and the whispers surged into a cacophony. He saw shapes in the corners of his vision, impossible geometries unfolding like flowers made of bone and fire. His heartbeat stuttered, his breath quickened, and then, for the briefest moment, he felt it. A sense of connection. To what he couldn't say, but it was vast and terrible and beautiful all at once. "Good," the masked man murmured. "The gift takes root." They didn't kill him. That was the first cliff he stumbled over. He'd expected a sacrifice, expected his life to end here in blood and chanting. But when the ritual ended, they unchained him. His wounds were bound with strips of cloth that smelled of herbs and burnt offerings, and he was half led, half dragged into the labyrinth of tunnels beneath the altar chamber. His legs trembled with every step, his mind reeling. They brought him to a room carved into the rock, lit by a single flickering lumen. The walls were marked with the same spiraling sigils now etched into his skin, and the air was thick with the musky scent of too many bodies living too close together. Figures lounged on crude bedding, other cultists, their flesh marked with different stages of transformation. Some bore only inked symbols like his, while others had changed. Subtly, disturbingly. A man with fingers elongated into delicate, claw-like digits. A woman whose eyes reflected light like an animal S. A child no older than 10 with a mouth full of serrated teeth, smiling at him too knowingly. "This is your cell," the scarred woman said. "You will sleep, eat, and meditate here until you hear the call. If you try to leave, you'll find only the tunnels, and the tunnels do not forgive." She turned to go. Jerk caught her sleeve. "Mara," he rasped, "my sister, help me find her." For a heartbeat, something like surprise flickered in her eyes. Then she shook her head slowly. "If she was meant to be here, she will be. If not, forget her. The pattern weaves as it wills. She left him there, staring after her, the door grinding shut like a tomb lid. He sat in the corner, knees pulled to his chest, trying to slow his breathing. The other cultists ignored him. Somewhere down the corridor, someone was laughing, a broken, hiccuping sound that raised the hairs on his neck. Sleep was impossible. Whenever his eyes drifted shut, he saw the writhing presence behind the cracks of reality, felt its gaze like a hand pressing against his skull. He didn't notice the boy at first. He couldn't have been older than 12, but his eyes were sharp and his movements held a strange confidence. He crouched near Jerk and whispered, "It doesn't stop. The whispers. You just get used to them, like rats in the walls." Jerk stared at him. "Who are you?" "Name S. Leo," the boy said. "Was a ganger before they found me. Got shot in the gut. Should have died, woke up here instead." He tapped the side of his head. "They get in here first. Once that happens, you're one of us whether you like it or not." "I'm not," Jerk began, but Leo cut him off with a grin that was all teeth. "You are, otherwise you'd be dead. You think they keep anyone who doesn't have the gift." He gestured toward a corner where a bundle of rags lay suspiciously still. "They don't." Jerk swallowed hard. Leo leaned closer. "Some try to run. They don't make it far, but you're different. They brought you straight to the altar. That means you're special." "I don't want to be special," Jerk whispered. Leo's grin faded. "Nobody does." The boy slipped away into the shadows, leaving Jerk alone with the weight of his words. Special. The word twisted in his gut like a knife. The hours that followed blurred together. There was no natural cycle of day and night down here, only the endless flicker of failing lumens and the constant drip of water from unseen cracks. They were given food, thin gruel ladled from steaming vats, and told to meditate before the sigils. Most obeyed without question, their faces serene in their fanatic devotion. Jerk tried, if only to blend in, but every time he closed his eyes the whispers surged, teasing and tempting, promising and threatening in equal measure. It was during one of these forced meditations that he heard it, a scream, sharp and human, echoing down the tunnels. Every head in the cell turned. Some smiled, others whispered prayers. Leo caught his eye and mouthed one word, "testing." Before Jerk could ask, the door opened. Two cultists entered, faces hidden behind rough masks, and pointed at him. "You, come." His stomach dropped. He rose on shaky legs, every nerve screaming that this was wrong, that whatever weighted down those tunnels was worse than the altar. But resistance wasn't an option. Not here. They led him through twisting corridors lit by torches rather than lumens, their flames guttering in unseen drafts. The deeper they went, the more the walls changed, stone giving way to some fleshy material that pulsed faintly beneath the torchlight. The air grew hotter, heavier. The whispers surged. When they reached the chamber, Jerk's breath caught. It was smaller than the altar hall, but more disturbing. The walls were covered in what looked like veins, thick and dark, throbbing in time with some unseen heartbeat. In the center stood a pit, and from the pit rose a sound that froze the marrow in his bones. A low, guttural growl, layered with something almost human. "This is where you prove yourself," one of the masked cultists said, "or you feed the pattern." They shoved him forward. Jerk stumbled toward the pit, the heat rising like a furnace. Peering over the edge, he saw movement, something pale and slick, shifting just beyond the reach of the torchlight. A pair of eyes opened in the darkness below, reflecting the firelight with an intelligence that made his blood run cold. The ground beneath him trembled as the thing in the pit began to climb. And somewhere deep in his skull, the whispers began to laugh. Jerk's breath caught as a clawed hand emerged from the pit, pale, almost translucent, its skin stretched taut over tendons that shifted like coiled wires beneath the surface. The thing moved with a terrible patience, hauling itself upward inch by inch, each movement accompanied by the wet sound of flesh peeling against stone. Its fingers ended in long, curved talons, not unlike a tyrannid, though this creature was smaller, younger. The cultists behind Jerk fell silent, their chants replaced by a reverent hush that made the air feel heavier. Torches sputtered as if the creature's presence consumed the oxygen in the room. The head rose next, elongated, bulbous, with ridges like bone growths running along its crest. Its eyes locked onto Jerk immediately. They were not the eyes of a beast. They were calculating, curious, the kind of gaze that stripped away every layer of defiance and peered into the quivering core beneath. Jerk staggered backward, but the cultists shoved him forward again until he stood at the very lip of the pit. "This is your trial," the masked cultist hissed. "Feed the gift or be fed to it." Jerk's heart pounded. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body was frozen between the fear of the creature ahead and the zealots behind. The creature's torso emerged, slender, too human in some places, grotesquely alien in others. Its chest was marked by the same spiraling sigils they'd carved into his flesh earlier, only here they bulged outward as if the symbols were living tumors under its skin. Its breathing was wet and labored, and with each exhalation came a sound that was almost a laugh. "Feed the gift." The whispers slid through his skull, seductive and relentless. "Prove your worth. Let the pattern claim you." The creature lunged, not with full speed but enough to test him. Jerk threw himself aside instinctively, the talons scraping stone where he just stood. The cultists cheered. They weren't here to help him, they were here to watch, to see whether the gift would accept him or devour him. Jerk scrambled to his feet, his back hitting the fleshy wall. His fingers brushed something warm and pulsing beneath the surface, and he jerked his hand away, bile rising in his throat. The creature turned toward him, slow and deliberate, savoring his panic. Its jaws parted to reveal a double row of teeth like broken glass. Leo's words flashed in his head. "Once they get in here, you're one of us whether you like it or not." He looked down at his forearm. The symbol carved there was glowing faintly, a soft, sickly light that seemed to pulse in time with the creature's heartbeat. When their gazes locked again, something shifted. For a moment, Jerk wasn't seeing through his own eyes but through its. He felt the heat of the chamber, the scent of blood, the pull of the pattern that connected them. The creature froze, head cocked. The cultists noticed. Their muttering turned frantic. He's linking already." Jerk didn't understand what was happening. He didn't want this connection, didn't want the alien rhythm threading through his veins, but it was there, wrapping around his mind like a vine tightening around a tree trunk. The creature lunged again, faster this time, but instead of striking, it stopped just short, talons digging into the ground as if testing his response. Then slowly, it lowered its head. The masked cultist stepped forward, voice booming. "The gift acknowledges him." The crowd erupted in wild, feverish cheers. Jerk stood there trembling, his knees threatening to give out, staring at the creature that could have torn him apart but instead bowed as if recognizing something in him. The cultists rushed forward, hauling him back from the pit and wrapping him in rough cloth. They chanted around him, hands grabbing his arms, shoulders, hair, marking him with smears of blood from their own fingers. Someone pressed a burning brand to the wound on his chest, sealing it with a hiss. The pain jolted him back to himself, but even then, the link with the creature hummed faintly in the back of his skull like a second heartbeat that refused to fade. They led him back to the main cavern, but everything had changed. People stared at him differently now, not as a captive, but as something marked. The scarred woman appeared again, her sharp eyes assessing him. "Few survive the offering pit," she said. "Fewer still are accepted." "I didn't do anything," Jerk said hoarsely. She tilted her head. "The pattern acts through you, whether you will it or not." Her words sent a chill down his spine. Days blurred together after that, though time in the tunnels was a meaningless concept. He was given better food, cleaner bedding, and a small alcove near the upper chambers instead of the crowded cell. Leo visited often, perched cross-legged on the floor as if he owned the place. "You're a big deal now," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "They're saying the gift favored you from the start." Jerk stared at the boy. "I didn't ask for any of this." Nobody does, Leo replied. But that doesn't matter. Down here, what the pattern wants, the pattern gets, and it wanted you. The whispers grew stronger with each passing day. Sometimes they were faint, like wind through distant tunnels. Other times they rose to a deafening chorus that drowned out thought. He learned to move through the daily rituals automatically, chanting, carving runes, preparing offerings, while his mind warred against the alien presence seeping deeper into him. Then came the dreams. At first they were scattered fragments, visions of endless starfields, cities twisted into impossible spirals, oceans of black ichor rising to swallow entire worlds. But as nights passed, the dreams sharpened. He stood on a vast plain beneath a sky split open by a wound of light. Towering figures watched him from the edges, some human, some not. And in the center of it all, the creature from the pit waited, whispering without a mouth, beckoning him closer. When he awoke, his hands were often bloody from clawing at the walls in his sleep. The scarred woman, whose name he eventually learned was Rhea, began appearing more frequently, always at the edges of rituals, observing him with a calculating gaze. One day she beckoned him to follow her into a chamber lined with bones arranged in spirals. The air here was cold, dry, unlike the oppressive humidity of the lower tunnels. "There are paths before you," she said, lighting a thin stick of incense. "The gift has marked you. Now you must choose to embrace it fully or to break against it." "I don't want either," Jerk said. Rhea smiled faintly, though there was no kindness in it. "Want has nothing to do with destiny." She stepped closer, placing a hand over the scar on his chest. "The pattern showed us a vision when you arrived, a convergence. You will be part of it. You can resist and be destroyed, or you can walk the path and become something greater." "Greater?" he laughed bitterly. "You call this greater, living underground, worshipping things that should never exist." Her grip tightened. "You don't understand yet, but you will." As she left, the torches dimmed, and for the first time Jerk felt something stir inside the scar. A pulse, a response. The gift was no longer just whispering, it was growing. That night another dream came, clearer than any before. He was standing before a great rift in the sky, and through it he saw shapes moving, vast, beautiful, and horrifying. A voice, neither male nor female, spoke directly into his soul. "You are not reborn to hide. You are reborn to open the way." He woke with a scream, the sound echoing through the tunnels. Cultists gathered at his door, their faces lit with fanatic joy. "He's been chosen," they shouted. "The pattern has spoken." Rhea appeared behind them, her eyes blazing. "Prepare the convergence," she ordered. "It begins sooner than we thought." Jerk lay back, trembling. He didn't know what the convergence was, but he understood one thing with gut-wrenching certainty. He was running out of time to stop whatever they planned. And deep in the pit, the creature stirred, as if it had heard his scream. The tunnels were louder than usual that morning, alive with the shuffle of hurried feet and the murmur of frantic voices echoing through stone corridors. Jerk stood in the shadows of the passage outside his alcove, watching as robed figures moved like a river flowing toward some unseen source. The air was thick with incense and excitement, but beneath that he sensed something else, a current of fear, sharp and electric. The whispers in his mind were stronger too, weaving through the sounds of the cult like threads in a tapestry, pulling his attention toward the deeper halls. Leo appeared from around a bend, breathless and wide-eyed, clutching a strip of tattered cloth stained with some dark fluid. "They're calling everyone to the Hall of Devotion," he said, his usual grin replaced by a tight grimace. "Rhea says the convergence starts tonight. No delays." "Convergence," Jerk repeated. The word felt heavy in his mouth, like it carried more weight than its syllables suggested. "What is it, Leo? Tell me the truth this time." Leo hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. He glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "I don't know everything. Nobody does. But they say the convergence is when the pattern shows its full shape, when the gift chooses its vessel. Rhea's been waiting for this for years. They think They think it's going to open something. Open what? Leo's gaze flicked involuntarily toward the direction of the offering pit. A door. Not a real door, I mean. Well, not like the ones we use, but something bigger, something old. They think the stars themselves will change shape when it happens. Jarek's stomach tightened. And you believe this? The boy's expression flickered. I didn't at first, but then I saw what happened to you down there, the way the creature bowed, the way Rhea looks at you now. Jarek, they think you might be the vessel. The words hit him like a hammer to the chest. He staggered back, bile rising in his throat. No, that's insane. I'm not one of them. I didn't choose any of this. But the pattern did, Leo whispered. The chanting started soon after. It rolled through the tunnels like a storm front, rising in waves that seemed to shake the walls themselves. The cultists gathered in the Hall of Devotion, a massive circular chamber deep beneath the main tunnels. Jarek stood at the back, pressed against the cold stone wall, watching the frenzy unfold. Rhea stood at the center of the hall, her arms raised high, her voice weaving through the chanting like a blade cutting through fog. The masked cult leader stood beside her, silent and unmoving, his presence commanding the attention of hundreds without a single word. Torches and braziers cast wild shadows that made the carvings on the walls seem alive. Spirals, runes, and grotesque figures twisted in the flickering light. At the far end of the chamber, a massive slab of black stone jutted from the floor at an angle, carved with sigils that glimmered faintly like dying embers. Jarek recognized the pattern carved into it. It was the same shape that had burned itself into his flesh. Rhea's voice rang out clear and sharp. The pattern has spoken. The gift has chosen. Tonight we stand at the edge of revelation. The convergence is upon us. A roar of ecstatic cheers filled the chamber. Some cultists dropped to their knees. Others lifted their hands toward the ceiling as if trying to grasp something beyond reach. The masked leader finally raised his hand, and silence fell like a hammer. The vessel approaches, he intoned. Every eye turned toward Jarek. He froze, the blood draining from his face. Hands grabbed him from behind, dozens of them, and before he could react, he was lifted off his feet, carried above the heads of the chanting throng toward the black stone slab. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum of war. No, stop. You've got the wrong person. His words were swallowed by the roar of the cult. They laid him against the slab, binding his wrists and ankles with chains etched with runes that burned cold against his skin. Rhea stepped forward, her face glowing with feverish devotion. The pattern chose you the moment you survived the offering pit, she whispered, close enough that he could smell the strange incense on her breath. You're not here by accident, Jarek. You're here because the stars demanded it. I'm not your vessel, he spat. I'm not your anything. She only smiled as if pitying him. You will understand soon. The chanting resumed, faster and louder than before. Cultists formed a spiral pattern around the slab, each holding small blades, drawing blood from their palms and letting it drip onto the ground. The blood ran through carved channels in the floor, flowing toward the center of the spiral where Jarek lay. The black stone beneath him began to hum, a deep, resonant vibration that rattled his teeth and made his bones ache. The whispers in his mind exploded into a cacophony. Open, accept, become. The words overlapped until they became a single, overwhelming command. His scar burned, glowing like a brand pressed against hot coals. He writhed against the chains, but they held firm. Then the masked leader stepped forward. For the first time, he removed his mask. Jarek expected a face twisted by fanaticism, maybe scarred or tattooed. Instead, what he saw made his blood run cold. The man's skin was stretched too tightly over his skull, his eyes entirely black, no whites left. Veins pulsed visibly beneath his translucent flesh, writhing like worms. And yet there was a terrible calm in his expression, like someone who had seen the end of the universe and accepted it. He placed a hand over Jarek's chest, directly on the scar. The pattern breathes through you, he said softly. You are its door. Jerk tried to scream, but his voice was drowned out by the rising chorus. The torches flared brighter, casting the chamber in blood-red light. The runes on the slab ignited fully now, tracing the spiral pattern with searing brilliance. The ground trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, a deep, resonant boom echoed through the tunnels like the beating of a colossal heart. And then he felt it. Something vast and hungry stirred beyond the edges of his perception. A pressure built in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. His vision blurred. The whispers coalesced into a single, deafening roar that wasn't coming from inside his head anymore. It was coming from everywhere. The masked leader began reciting words in a guttural, ancient tongue. Rhea joined him, and then the entire cult. Their voices intertwined into a single, monstrous invocation. The stone slab beneath Jerk grew hotter, the sigils searing his skin through the thin fabric of his robes. Images flooded his mind. A sky tearing open like flesh, black tendrils reaching down from the stars, cities crumbling beneath tides of alien flesh, worlds screaming as something unspeakable forced its way through the veil between realities. He realized with gut-twisting horror that they weren't opening a door to something, they were opening him. The scar on his chest split open. Not like a wound, more like a flower blooming, petals of flesh peeling back to reveal a pulsing light beneath. The cult went wild, their chanting reaching a fever pitch. The air itself seemed to shatter, and for a heartbeat, Jerk saw it. A colossal eye staring through him from beyond the veil, intelligent and starving. And then everything went white. He didn't pass out, he was pulled through. He was standing in the same star-split plane from his dreams. The rift in the sky was wider now, spilling impossible colors and shapes into the air. The creature from the pit crouched before him, larger, fully grown, its eyes locked onto him with recognition. Behind it, towering figures loomed, things that defied logic and geometry, their bodies shifting with every glance. A voice neither sound nor thought filled the air. "You are the threshold." Jerk fell to his knees, clutching his head. "I don't want this." Want is irrelevant. The pattern has chosen. The ground beneath him cracked like glass. Through the fissures, he saw the cult chamber far below, Rhea's face upturned in ecstasy as the veil continued to thin. The convergence wasn't just beginning, it was happening now. He realized with sickening clarity that if he didn't act, they would succeed. Something vast would step through him like a doorway, and the world above would burn. But how could he stop it, when the pattern itself had its claws wrapped around his soul? And then through the roaring storm of whispers, he heard something new. A voice, small, human, familiar. Jerk. His sister's voice. He snapped his head toward the sound. There, at the far edge of the plain, standing beneath the wound in the sky, was Mara. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with soot and blood, but it was her. She was alive. The cult chamber shattered like glass around him, and the vision blurred, half starfield, half reality. He saw Mara being dragged into the hall of devotion by two cultists, fighting, screaming his name. Everything inside him shifted. For the first time since his rebirth, the whispers faltered. And Jerk understood. The pattern might have chosen him, but it hadn't accounted for her. The chamber blurred around him like a reflection disturbed by a thrown stone. Reality and the star-torn plain overlapping in nauseating waves that made it difficult to tell which way was up. Jerk gasped, every breath sharp as glass in his lungs, and tried to ground himself against the roar of voices, both the cultists chanting in the hall of devotion and the cosmic chorus echoing through the rent in his mind. Mara's voice cut through all of it like a thread of sunlight through storm clouds. He focused on that sound, desperate, clawing for it as if it were the only real thing left in a world unraveling. "Mara," he whispered, and the name burned in his throat like a prayer spoken after too many years of silence. He saw her more clearly now, her hair matted with grime, cheeks streaked with soot, eyes wild but bright with that same stubborn fire she'd always had. Two cultists dragged her forward, their grips iron on her arms, oblivious to the fact that they were pulling something infinitely more dangerous into the room than they realized. The sight of her hit him harder than any ritual, any whispered cosmic truth. Mara shouldn't have been here. She was supposed to be safe in the Habs, miles from the hive's lower levels, far from the cult's influence. Her presence shattered something inside him, the illusion that his rebirth had severed his ties to his old life. It hadn't. She was the living proof that the person he used to be wasn't gone yet. He was still her brother, even if everything else had changed. The masked leader turned slowly, his black eyes narrowing. "Bring her," he commanded, his voice carrying effortlessly over the tumult. The cultists obeyed, dragging Mara to the base of the slab. She kicked one of them squarely in the knee, and for a brief second Jerk almost laughed. It was such a Mara thing to do, reckless and fierce even in the jaws of death. But the laughter died in his throat when one of the other cultists struck her across the face, sending her sprawling. Something inside Jerk snapped. The visions of the star plane faltered, and for the first time since the ritual began, he felt a surge of his own will rising to the surface. Not the pattern's will, not the cult's. His. "Don't touch her," he roared, straining against the chains. Sparks flew from the runes etched into the metal, reacting to his defiance like a beast sensing its leash being tested. Rhea stepped forward, her expression radiant with fanatical fervor. "She is part of it now, Jerk, don't you see? The pattern brings everything together. Even her presence is no accident. The door has opened, and all that was once separate will converge." "She's not part of this," he growled through gritted teeth. Rhea's smile was infuriatingly serene. "Everything is part of this. You, me, her, the stars themselves." Mara lifted her head, blood running from the corner of her mouth, and spat at Rhea's feet. "You're all insane," she hissed. Then her eyes locked onto Jerk, and despite the chaos swirling around them, he saw something clear and steady there. "Jerk, fight it." The words hit him like a physical blow. She said it with the same voice she'd used when they were children, when she'd drag him out of his funks after long shifts at the Manufactorum, when she'd refused to let him surrender to the grind of hive life. She was older than him by only a year, but she'd always been the anchor between them. She'd always believed he could be more. The masked leader raised his hands, and the chanting shifted pitch, becoming lower, more guttural. The air thickened as if the chamber itself was inhaling. "The vessel must be fully unbound," he declared. "The pattern resists his old self. Remove the tether." Jerk's blood ran cold. "No," he whispered, understanding too late what they meant. Two cultists seized Mara, hauling her toward a smaller altar at the edge of the spiral. The slab there was covered in etched sigils, and above it hung a device that looked disturbingly like a hybrid between a surgical instrument and a religious relic. It gleamed with sterile cruelty in the torchlight. He pulled against the chains with everything he had, feeling his wrists tear and bleed. The metal bit into his flesh, but something beneath his skin answered the call. The glowing sigils flared as if surprised by his resistance, and cracks spiderwebbed across the black stone slab beneath him. The star plane flared into view again, but this time it was unstable, flickering like a failing lumen. The colossal eye above him widened, not in surprise but in interest. It could feel his defiance. It liked it. The whispers twisted. "Break, break, break." Rhea turned toward him, her face flushed with exhilaration. "Do you feel it, Jerk? The pattern rejoices in your struggle. It makes the convergence stronger." He barely heard her, his entire being focused on Mara as she was forced onto the smaller altar. She fought like a wild thing, kicking, biting, screaming his name. The sight carved through him like a blade. And then something changed. The burning scar on his chest flared, not with pain, but with a pulse that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. It was the first time since his rebirth that the power inside him responded to his will rather than overwhelming it. He seized that thread instinctively. The whispers shifted tone, confused, almost hesitant. He latched onto that confusion and pulled. The slab beneath him cracked fully, and the chains snapped like brittle twine. The chamber shook violently, sending dust and shards of stone raining from the ceiling. The cultist screamed in shock as Jerk staggered to his feet, the glowing sigils across his chest casting wild light over the walls. The masked leader's black eyes widened. "Stop him!" he bellowed. They rushed him, dozens of robed figures with blades and ritual implements, but they were too slow. The air around Jerk warped, shimmering like heat haze, and an invisible force hurled the first attackers backward, smashing them into walls. Their cries echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. Rhea stared at him in awe, not fear. "Yes," she whispered, "this is what the pattern wanted all along." He ignored her and sprinted toward the smaller altar where Mara struggled. The ground cracked under his feet, reality itself bending in his wake. Cultists tried to block his path, but a wave of unseen energy burst from him like a shockwave, scattering them like leaves in a storm. Mara's eyes widened when she saw him. "Jerk." He reached her, tearing the bindings from her wrists with a strength he didn't know he possessed. She fell against him, gasping. "You idiot," she whispered. "You're supposed to stay away from trouble." He laughed, a short, broken sound, but it felt real. "You're the one who came here." Before either of them could speak again, the masked leader's voice thundered through the hall. "Enough." The chanting stopped instantly. The torches guttered, plunging the chamber into shadows. The massive black stone slab at the center pulsed once, twice, then cracked down the middle with a sound like a planet splitting apart. The colossal eye flared in the star plane above, and reality screamed. The leader stretched out his arms, and his body began to twist, bones cracking, flesh splitting, black veins crawling across his skin like a spreading infection. His eyes bled darkness. The convergence cannot be stopped. If the vessel will not open willingly, then it will be torn apart. The chamber erupted into chaos. Cultists fell to their knees in frenzied prayer, others fled toward the tunnels, while Rhea stood laughing hysterically, arms raised to the heavens. The floor split open, revealing a void beneath that pulsed with sickening light. Jerk grabbed Mara's hand. "We have to get out." She looked around wildly. "Out? Look at this place. Where's out supposed to be?" He didn't have an answer. The world was unraveling, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't letting the cult use him anymore. Not for their god, not for their pattern, not at the cost of Mara's life. The star plane shimmered into full reality now, overlaying the chamber completely. The colossal eye stared down, its gaze locking onto Jerk. The whispers returned, deafening. Threshold, chosen, open. And beneath that, faint but unmistakable, he heard Mara's voice again. "Fight it, Jerk." He closed his eyes and took a breath. The whispers were vast, infinite, but they were not his. Mara's voice was, his heartbeat was, his will was. For the first time since his rebirth, he pushed back. The world shuddered. And the eye blinked. The blink of that colossal, cosmic eye didn't feel like something merely seen. It was as though the universe itself had hesitated, faltered in its endless rhythm. The air in the chamber turned brittle, thick with pressure, and every flame bent inward, pulled toward the center where Jerk stood. The walls groaned like a leviathan shifting in its sleep. Jerk's knees buckled beneath the weight of that gaze, but he did not fall. The ground cracked beneath his boots, and somewhere deep in the planet's crust, something answered the defiance that rippled out from him like shockwaves in still water. The cultists froze. All their chants, all their frenzied movements had been aimed toward this moment of divine convergence. Yet what they witnessed now wasn't the smooth unfolding of the pattern as they had envisioned. It was interruption, disruption. Their god had paused to look, truly look, at the vessel meant to be its open door, and the vessel was looking back. Mara's hand tightened around his, grounding him in a way nothing else could. Her knuckles were bloodied, her face still bruised from the earlier struggle, but her eyes burned fiercely. "Jerk," she breathed, Whatever you're doing, don't stop." He didn't reply. He couldn't. His voice was buried under the roaring in his head, a roaring that wasn't entirely external. It was as if all of creation had drawn a breath and was now waiting to exhale. The masked leader, what was left of him, stumbled forward. His body was a grotesque patchwork now, bones elongated at wrong angles, muscles twitching beneath black-veined skin, his mask split down the middle, revealing teeth that had multiplied like a predator's. He extended one malformed hand toward Jerk, not in aggression but almost in supplication. "Do you see?" he rasped, his voice now like grinding metal. "You see, it has chosen to notice you. You are the fulcrum, the hinge upon which the pattern turns." Jerk shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered, and the single syllable cracked like thunder through the room. The leader recoiled as if struck. And then the chamber moved. Not figuratively, physically. The spiraling runes carved into the floor began to rotate, grinding against stone as ancient mechanisms awoke beneath the surface. The slabs shifted, and the black spiral widened, yawning open into a gaping chasm. From that chasm, light poured forth, not clean, radiant light, but a greasy, undulating illumination that felt alive, as though a wound in reality itself had been torn wide. Mara stumbled back, clutching Jerk's arm. "What is that?" "The threshold," Rhea whispered in awe, stepping forward with her arms raised. Her eyes shone with fanatic ecstasy. "The door between. He is forcing it open himself." Jerk realized with a sick twist of horror that she was right. His defiance hadn't just disrupted the ritual, it had accelerated it. The pattern wasn't some passive force waiting to be obeyed, it was responsive, twisting around every choice he made. The moment he pushed back, the threshold reacted, tearing itself wider. He wasn't stopping the god, he was challenging it, and it was accepting the challenge. The cosmic eye blinked again, and the star plane bled fully into the chamber. Walls dissolved into swirling constellations. The ceiling peeled away like paper burned from the edges. The cultists screamed, not in terror but in reverence, as their world and their gods began to merge. Jerk staggered under the force of it. His skin rippled, the scar on his chest blazing like a star going nova. Images flooded his mind, not in sequence but all at once, the pattern showing him possible futures. In one he saw himself surrendering, opening fully, becoming the perfect vessel, the eye descending to anchor itself in his flesh. In another he saw himself fighting it and being crushed, obliterated like dust before a hurricane. And in another still, a possibility he didn't understand, his hand gripping Mara's, both of them falling into the threshold together, not consumed but passing through. The leader's voice rose, fevered. "Take it, vessel, become the door, let the pattern weave through you." Mara turned to him, her voice trembling but fierce. "Jerk, don't you dare let them win." Her words cut through the torrent. He turned toward her, and for a heartbeat, the cosmic chaos around them dimmed. He remembered who she was to him, not just his sister but his anchor, his last tie to the life he'd lost when the cult found him. She represented everything that wasn't the pattern. And that was when the eye spoke. Not in words, but in a sound that bypassed ears and crashed directly into his soul. 1,000 voices layered over each other, each one both alien and terrifyingly familiar. They called his name, not the name he bore now, but the one he'd had before rebirth, the one Mara used to call out in the dark corridors of the hive when they were lost as children. For the first time he felt its intent clearly. It didn't want to destroy him, it wanted to inhabit him, to remake him as a bridge, to make him eternal. Mara saw the shift in his eyes. She stepped closer, cupping his face in her blood-streaked hands. "Jerk, look at me, not at it, me." He trembled under her touch, torn between the infinite and the fragile. The whispers coiled tighter, seductive. "Open, and you will never be alone again." Her voice cut through that promise. "You're not alone, I'm right here, I never left." The threshold yawned wider, and a tendril of light lashed out, striking the masked leader. He convulsed, screaming as his body was ripped apart into a storm of flesh and darkness, drawn into the opening like paper into a fire. Rhea fell to her knees, laughing and weeping at once. Jerk understood then there was no stopping the threshold anymore. The door was open, but he could still choose what passed through. He could still choose. He turned to Mara, and she seemed to understand without him saying a word. "Then we do this together," she said, gripping his hand. He nodded. The cultists surged toward them in a frenzy, perhaps to stop them, perhaps to throw themselves into the threshold. Their faces were a blur of ecstasy and terror. Jerk raised his free hand, and power not borrowed but claimed exploded outward. The air turned to liquid force, smashing the oncoming wave aside. Bodies slammed into walls, pillars cracked, the entire chamber howled like a wounded beast. Step by step they moved toward the chasm. The threshold pulsed, alive and watching. The eye loomed closer now, filling half the sky, its gaze like gravity itself. The star plane sang, and every note was a demand. Open, become, merge. Jerk stopped at the edge, looking down into the writhing light. It wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a tear in the fabric of everything he'd ever known. It terrified him to his core. Mara squeezed his hand. "Jerk," she whispered, "whatever happens, I'm with you." He closed his eyes. For a heartbeat he let go of everything, the cult, the pattern, the god, the expectations. All that remained was his choice. And he jumped. The world inverted. Gravity ceased to exist. The threshold swallowed them whole, and for an instant there was no up or down, no inside or outside, just endless light and darkness entwined. The whispers roared triumphantly. But they weren't alone in that fall. Something else followed. The eye. It surged after them like a sun collapsing inward, its immense form folding through the tear, pursuing its chosen vessel into the unknown. And as they fell deeper into the threshold, Jerk realized something with bone-deep certainty. Whatever waited on the other side wasn't merely a continuation of their world. It was something else, something that might remake them entirely. And they had brought the god with them. Falling through the threshold wasn't like falling through air or void. It was like being pulled through the veins of a living thing. The light around them wasn't static. It rippled, folded, and bled into darkness, then back into light again, as though reality itself were breathing. Jerk held onto Mara's hand with a grip that was both desperate and determined, because if he let go now, he knew they'd be torn apart and scattered into the pattern like threads cut loose from a loom. The roar of the whispers grew deafening, rising from distant murmurs to a cosmic crescendo that filled every corner of his mind. It wasn't just outside him anymore. It was inside him, crawling through his thoughts, trying to reshape them into its own language. He saw things, not memories, possibilities. He saw himself standing atop cities reshaped into spirals, speaking with the voice of a god, his body blazing with unholy light. He saw himself kneeling, consumed and hollow, his face blank as the pattern spoke through his mouth. He saw himself lying broken on a blackened plain, Mara's hand limp in his, the stars overhead rearranging themselves into the eye's terrible gaze. Each vision clawed at him, trying to seduce, to threaten, to bind him to a future not yet written but already waiting. Mara's voice cut through it like a blade. "Jerk, don't listen to it." He turned his head toward her. She was still there, bloodied, terrified, but burning bright with that same stubborn light that had saved him more times than he could count. She was real, and the visions, for all their grandeur, were not. But behind them, pursuing relentlessly, came the eye. It moved without moving, a colossal presence that bent the threshold around it as it descended. Its surface rippled like oil, its gaze fixed entirely on him, patient and inexorable. This was its domain. It had opened this way for him, and now it wanted to claim what it had marked. The pressure intensified. It wasn't just gravity, it was a pull on his soul. Jerk felt his body shudder, as if his bones themselves were beginning to loosen, as though the threshold wanted to unravel him into strands and weave him into something new. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remember who he was, not the vessel they wanted, but Jerk, the boy who had grown up scavenging scraps in hive corridors, the brother who had carried Mara home when she'd sprained her ankle, the man who had once believed he had no place in the universe except in the shadows. And then, just as the light began to consume everything, they landed. It wasn't a landing so much as a sudden arrival. One instant they were falling through a formless void, the next their feet slammed onto solid ground, if it could even be called that. The surface beneath them was smooth and black like obsidian, stretching out infinitely in all directions. Above there was no sky, only the threshold itself, a vast wound in space, swirling with light and darkness, through which the eye now pushed, its massive form sliding through reality like a predator breaching water. Mara stumbled, catching herself on his arm. Where are we?" Jerk turned slowly, looking around. The air here was utterly still, oppressive. And then in the distance he saw movement, shapes coalescing out of the black surface. Figures. At first they were silhouettes, but as they drew closer, their features resolved and Jerk's blood ran cold. They were him. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. Each one slightly different, some bearing strange armor, others cloaked in rags, some crowned with light, others broken and twisted. They stood in silence, their faces reflecting every possibility he had glimpsed during the fall. One of them stepped forward, a version of himself robed in spiraling runes, eyes glowing with divine light. "You cannot escape what you are," the figure said. Its voice was Jerk-esque but layered, resonant, carrying an impossible weight. "Every path leads here." Mara took a step forward, defiant. "No, it doesn't. He chooses his own path." The other Jerk tilted his head, almost pitying. "Choice is an illusion when the pattern has already been woven. He is merely the thread that must fall into place." Behind them the threshold split wider. The eye emerged fully, its colossal gaze descending upon the black plain. Its presence flattened everything. Air, space, thought. Cultists would have fallen to their knees in rapture. Stars would have burned out from the pressure of its attention. Here, there were no cultists, no hive, no humanity. Only the god, the vessel, and the infinite field of what could be. Jerk felt something deep inside him begin to tear. He was being stretched between his past and this unfathomable future, between Mara's voice and the eye's command. His duplicates advanced, each one murmuring a different destiny: ruler, martyr, betrayer, savior, god, corpse. Their voices merged into a chaotic litany that matched the cosmic whispering overhead. Mara grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. You are Jerk, my brother, not theirs, not its. Yours, you hear me." Her eyes locked onto his, fierce and unyielding. In that moment, amidst the cacophony of destiny and divinity, her voice was the only real thing left. The duplicates faltered, the litany wavered. Jerk straightened slowly. "I hear you." He turned to face the oncoming tide of his other selves. "I am not you," he said to them. "Not any of you, your echoes, possibilities, but I'm not a possibility, I'm real." The glowing version sneered. "You can't defy the pattern." "Watch me," Jerk replied. Power surged through him, not the cult-s, not the god-s, but something born from the very act of choosing. The black plane shuddered. The duplicates froze, then cracked like mirrors struck by a hammer, their forms shattering into spirals of light that bled back into the ground. One by one they collapsed, until only he remained standing in that vast emptiness. The eye above flared, furious now, its whispers turning from seductive to enraged. "Threshold, vessel, open." Jerk lifted his chin and met its gaze. "No." The word struck the space like a weapon. The light rippled, the ground shook. The god didn't understand no. It was a being of inevitability, of patterns that always resolved. But this was not resolution. This was rebellion. Tendrils of light lashed out from the eye, slamming into the ground around them, cracking the plane like glass. Mara screamed as one tendril nearly struck her, but Jerk moved instinctively, throwing up a shield of raw will that deflected the blow. The energy of the god met his defiance and recoiled, as though struck by something it hadn't anticipated. "You can't win," Mara shouted over the din. "I don't need to win," Jerk said, his voice calm, steady. "I just need to end it." He closed his eyes, focusing inward. The scar on his chest burned like molten metal, but he reached past it deeper to the place where his heartbeat still thundered, steady and human. The pattern's power was vast, but it depended on him accepting it. It was a door. He was the hinge, and hinges could break. The plane shook violently as the eye realized what he was doing. Tendrils struck again and again, but his resolve held. Mara stood beside him, hands gripping his arm, adding her strength to his. Not magical, not cosmic, but real. Human. Jerk inhaled, then snapped the hinge. Light erupted from his chest, a blinding, searing brilliance that wasn't the pattern's oily glow but something purer, drawn from the very act of defiance. The threshold above screamed as the light struck it. The eye writhed, its perfect form fracturing, splitting apart into rivers of darkness and light that recoiled like wounded beasts. Reality folded. The black plane shattered beneath them, the wound in the sky sealing itself with a thunderclap that shook every corner of existence. The last thing Jerk felt was Mara's hand clutching his. Then silence. He awoke to the sound of distant rain. They were lying in the ruins of the cult's chamber, the spiral broken, the torches extinguished. The ceiling had collapsed partially, revealing a sliver of the hive's rust-colored sky. Mara stirred beside him, groaning softly. "You did it," she whispered. Jerk looked down at his chest. The scar was still there, but the light was gone. The whispers were gone. He was himself. For the first time since the rebirth, truly himself. "No," he said softly, "we did it." Mara managed a tired smile. "Let's never do that again." He laughed weakly, pulling her into a tight embrace. The pattern was broken. The god was banished. And though the hive above them still rotted, and the galaxy beyond still burned with wars and horrors, in this small corner of existence, a choice had been made. And that choice was enough.